3 men, a completely locked lighthouse, a half-eaten meal left right on the table, and then they just vanish into thin air. Welcome to our explainer on the vanishing at Eilean Moor. It's honestly one of the most chilling and atmospheric mysteries we've ever looked into. So picture this. It's December 1900. We're looking at the remote island of Eilean Moor, way out in the desolate Flannan Isles of Scotland. Now, this isolated, totally uninhabited rock was home to exactly 3 men: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. These were the keepers, and they were tasked with one absolutely crucial duty: keeping that light burning through the overwhelming darkness. But here is the question that's been haunting historians for over a century. Where did they go? I mean, really, how do 3 highly experienced keepers, guys stationed at what was then a newly built, state-of-the-art facility, how do they just disappear from the face of the earth, leaving literally zero trace behind? Section 1. The empty lighthouse and a silent dock. To start piecing this giant puzzle together, we've got to jump forward a bit to December 26th. That's the day this whole mystery was actually uncovered. A relief ship had finally arrived at this unforgiving island, right? Their job was to swap out the crew, get these guys home for some much-needed rest. So the ship pulls up, they sound the horn, which is just a standard signal to say, hey, your replacements are here. But instead of the usual hustle and bustle of guys rushing down to the dock to greet them, nothing. Total silence. And that haunting, dead silence was the very first red flag that something on Eilean Moor had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Section 2. A chilling discovery and locked doors. Okay, let's dive right into this, because what happens next is straight out of a nightmare. The relief keeper, a guy named Joseph Moore, decides to row ashore completely by himself to investigate. He walks up the stone path, unlocks the heavy lighthouse door, and steps inside. And he's just hit with this freezing, deafening emptiness. The place is totally deserted. It was almost like time had just stopped. He found a half-eaten meal sitting right there on the kitchen table. Next to it, a chair was violently knocked over, like someone had jumped up in an absolute panic. The kitchen clock had completely stopped ticking. But the absolute craziest detail of all, one set of heavy oilskins, those thick waterproof raincoats, was still hanging perfectly on its peg. No, think about what that single hanging coat actually means in the dead of winter on the Scottish coast. That solitary raincoat tells us that one of these highly experienced keepers was in such a frantic, desperate rush that he sprinted outside into the deadly freezing December weather completely unprotected. Something interrupted their totally normal day so abruptly and with such violent urgency that grabbing a coat wasn't even an option. Section 3. The impossible storm and the logbook. Now, the physical clues inside were creepy enough, for sure, but the real creeping dread? That comes from the most unsettling piece of evidence left behind in that cold room: the official Lighthouse logbook, kept by Thomas Marshall. His frantic entries describe this sudden, terrifying storm that basically swallowed the island without warning. On December 12th, he writes that the winds were worse than anything he'd ever seen in his entire life at sea. He even wrote down that the other 2 men, and remember, these are hardened veteran keepers who know the ocean inside and out, he wrote that they were breaking down, crying, and praying for their lives. And then we get to the final entry, dated December 15th. It is definitely the most chilling detail of this whole thing. It just says, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." The haunting finality of those words just hung in the air of that empty, freezing lighthouse. It was like their final testament before the silence took over. But wait, here is the massive twist that turns this from a terrible tragedy into a legendary historical mystery. Marshall's logbook goes on and on about this terrifying, unprecedented storm that brought grown men to tears, right? Well, official weather reports from nearby islands and passing ships said something completely different. They confirmed that the weather around the Flannan Isles on those exact days was totally calm and clear. The storm literally did not exist. So from December 12th to the 14th, while Marshall is writing about apocalyptic winds and literally praying for deliverance, the actual weather recorded was serene and calm. Then we have that final log entry on December 15th. Now, official weather records do show that a devastating storm did eventually hit the area, but not until after December 16th. That is a full day after Thomas Marshall wrote those terrifying final words. So you really have to ask yourself, what phantom storm were these men actually fighting? Section 4. The tragic reality and a modern theory.
For well over a century, the weirdness of that logbook and those bizarre clues in the kitchen sparked some absolutely wild theories. I mean, people were guessing everything from sea monsters dragging them into the deep to aliens or even some sudden bout of murderous madness. But to really understand what happened, we've got to look past the myths and ground ourselves in the tragic, factual conclusion of the official investigation. They ended up pointing to a very real-world, terrifying explanation: a rogue wave. If you don't know, a rogue wave is basically an unexpected, abnormally massive, and incredibly powerful ocean wave that just strikes totally without warning. Even though the surrounding weather was officially calm, the ocean is an unpredictable beast, and they believe a massive wall of water swept right over the island's western landing platform in an absolute instant.
And this brilliantly illustrates the tragic sequence of events they think happened on that freezing rock. Two of the men were probably down by the cliffside, right, trying to urgently secure some equipment. Suddenly, out of nowhere, this giant rogue wave hits from a calm sea. Up in the lighthouse, the third man sees this immense danger happening. In a total panic, knocking over his chair in the process, he sprints outside without his protective coat to try and save his friends. But in the end, the immense power of the water was just way too much, and it pulled all three of them down into the icy, churning depths of the Atlantic.
It's honestly just a stark, terrifying reminder of the sheer power of nature. Three men, stationed in a modern fortress of stone, completely wiped away in the absolute blink of an eye. The mystery of their final days, those completely bizarre, contradictory logbook entries, the untouched meal, it all leaves us with one haunting thought: what other secrets are still buried out there in the freezing, unpredictable ocean? Thanks so much for exploring this chilling piece of history with me, and I'll chat you in the next explainer.